Let's dive into this history. Vinland Winds. Where the sea speaks first, and not in words. The sea did not make a sound that morning. It breathed, long, wide breaths that rose with the fog and curled between the pines. No gulls called. No waves broke. The water held itself like a secret. Smooth. Waiting. Kael stood at the edge of the forest, his boots dark with dew, his eyes fixed on the horizon where sea and sky blurred to silver. He had come to the forest for berries, a simple task, to gather the last of the fire fruit before frost. But the moment he stepped past the stone marker, the wind had turned. And it did not smell of pine. It smelled of iron. And salt. And stories too old for the tongue. Today, he whispered, echoing his grandfather's voice, the sea is thinking. He saw them before anyone else. Between the branches, tall shadows, rising higher than the trees. Long hulls, black as pitch, their carved heads snarling with open mouths and wooden eyes. Sails like spilled blood in morning light. They made no noise. They cut through the fog like knives through silence. Kael did not run. He watched. Because he had seen this before, in sleep. In his dream, the ocean had opened like a great eye, blinking salt and light. From it had come people of metal and steam, their beards thick with frost, their breaths smoking in the air. They did not speak. But they drew symbols in the sand that vanished as quickly as they were made. Among them was a girl. She wore red ribbons at her wrists, and a cloak too thin for the cold. She had turned and smiled at him, not in greeting, but in recognition. And now, here they were. Real. Alive. Unfolding from the mist like a prophecy too long hidden. Kael returned to the village with his jaw set tight. By the time he reached the outer ring of houses, the fire was already lit in the center circle. Olin, the elder, stood beside it, his staff held loosely in one hand, his face turned not toward the woods, but toward the sea. You saw them, he said before Kael could speak. Kael nodded. They are not ours, he said. Olin nodded once. And yet, they are not new. What comes has already walked this path. Only our memory is young, the villagers whispered. Some gripped bows. Others buried stones at the edge of the path. But Olin lifted his hand. No arrows today, he said. Today, we listen. On the sea, aboard one of the 3 ships that cut through the dawn, Freydis wrapped her hands in cloth. They were shaking. Not from fear, but from cold. Her breath curled before her, white and hollow. She was not a shield maiden. She was a watcher. Daughter of a smith who had followed Leif across the great waters, she carried little, a carving knife, a journal wrapped in seal leather, a length of red ribbon she kept tied inside her sleeve. She had dreamed of forests, of eyes beneath trees, of being seen. When the ships landed, no horns sounded. Only the quiet groan of hulls meeting sand. Only the soft sigh of boots stepping onto untouched ground. Freydis stepped from her ship, her foot pressing into the wet shoreline. She crouched there for a moment, hand brushing the sand. It was warmer than she expected. And waiting. That night, Kael could not sleep. His village sat wrapped in firelight and the thin hush of tension. The sea was still. The strangers had not moved inland. But the air had changed. He stepped outside, barefoot on the wooden steps. Above his home, 3 ravens circled. Their wings cut silent curves into the sky. One landed on the roof beam above him and tilted its head. And then, with a voice like gravel dragged through snow, it spoke. Vinland, it rasped. Kael's breath caught. He didn't know the word. But his bones did. He nodded slowly. I heard, he said. And across the shoreline, under a sky of black glass and far stars, Freydis woke. She had not meant to sleep. But something had pulled her awake, not sound, not light. A feeling. Her hand touched the sand beside her bedroll. There, half buried, was a stone, smooth, worn, and marked with a symbol she did not recognize. An eye. Drawn deep into the surface. She sat up slowly. In the woods, just beyond the edge of the trees, someone stood. Not moving. Not armed. Only watching. She did not scream. She did not reach for her knife. She looked back. And the figure, whoever it was, did not leave. Only nodded, once, and vanished between the trees. Where the first meeting holds no sword, only silence. At the edge of the world, where pine met sea and the sand still held the memory of sun, Freydis walked alone. The dusk deepened in slow colors, soft coppers and cooling indigos. The air held warmth close to the ground, but higher up, a crispness gathered. The kind that warned of night. Freydis had slipped from the Viking camp with no one noticing. Not that they would stop her. They had grown used to her wandering. She was not like the others, not a warrior, not quite a scout. She carried no sword, and yet she always returned with more than she left with: berries, dried feathers, odd-shaped stones, and the silence of the forest in her sleeves. Tonight she brought her usual. A small blade for cutting branches. A journal, tied closed with leather cord. And the pouch of red ribbons that never left her side. She did not know why she needed them. She only knew that when she tied a ribbon to a tree, she could find her way back, not just to camp, but to herself. She walked further than usual tonight, drawn by something she could not name. Not danger. Not curiosity. Something more like recognition. The trees parted gently for her. She reached a quiet clearing where grass gave way to sand, the place where the forest forgot itself and became shore. She crouched, pulled a thin branch from her belt, and began to draw in the sand. A sail. A longship. A wave. Not perfect drawings, but memory in motion. That's when she felt it. Not heard. Not seen. Felt. Like the air had changed shape around her. She turned her head slowly. Across the clearing, at the place where the shadows were thickest, someone stood. He did not move. He did not speak. But he was there, not like an intruder, not even like a watcher. He was placed, like a stone that had always belonged. Kael. His hair was dark, his shoulders narrow but sure, and his bow rested across his back, untouched. He had the kind of stillness that only belonged to things that knew how to wait. Their eyes met. It was not shock. Not fear. Just stillness finding stillness. Freydis did not rise. She only tilted her head slightly, observing. He did the same. The clearing held its breath. Then, the wind came. It slipped between them like a messenger, tugging at the branch above her head where she had tied a red ribbon earlier that day. The knot came loose. The ribbon fluttered down between them. It landed on the sand. A soft streak of crimson. She stood. Not quickly. With reverence, as if answering an invitation. She crossed the clearing, knelt beside the ribbon, and picked it up. Then, gently, she placed it in the middle of the space between them. Not a signal. Not a surrender. Just a bridge. Kael's eyes followed her movements, patient and focused. He took one step forward. Knelt across from her. With a single finger, he began to draw. A circle. A vertical line. A tree with roots and branches. Then he tapped the tree. Touched his chest. His voice, low, quiet, carrying moss instead of thunder, spoke. Here. Mine! Freydis answered in the same way. She picked a stick and drew a wave. A small boat. A ribbon fluttering above. She tapped the ribbon. Touched her chest. See. Me. Kael looked at her. He did not smile. But he bowed his head, a gesture full of meaning. Freydis reached into her pouch and removed a ribbon, older than the rest, edges worn, color faded but proud. She held it out, both palms open. Kael received it like a prayer. He held it for a moment. Then pressed it gently to his lips, then to his heart. I see you, he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a beginning. They sat in silence. The drawings blurred in the breeze. The forest grew still again, but not as before. Freydis stood. She did not turn her back as she stepped away. Kael remained, watching the place where she had been. Above him, 3 ravens passed, low and wide, painting a circle in the sky. The same shape he had drawn. He closed his hand around the ribbon. And whispered, "It's begun. Sometimes, it takes only one cut to tear a thread of peace." The morning did not begin with birdsong. It began with tension. At the northern edge of the camp, beneath the rough hide shelters and hung drying nets, Skardi stood with fists clenched, and silence pressed like fog around him. His axe was missing. And it wasn't just any tool. It was a blade carved with the names of his family, with knots of runes traced by fire. His brother had gifted it to him before the journey. It had never left his side. Until now. "I left it here," he said flatly, pointing to a flat stone where only empty air remained. "And now it's gone." Men gathered. Some crossed their arms. Others looked at the forest. Always the forest. "It's them," one muttered. "We knew they were watching. Maybe now they've decided to act." Skardi's voice was a blade itself. "No, maybe. They took it." Freydis heard the noise as she returned from gathering berries near the shore. Her braid was damp with sea spray, and her boots were stained from kelp and sand. She moved quickly toward the voices, but didn't join the circle. She stood a little apart, like always. But her thoughts were not with the blade. They were in the trees. In the space between trunks. In the silence she had shared with him. She saw again the way Kael's hands had traced symbols in the sand. The steadiness in his eyes. The way he had received her ribbon like it mattered. He would not take something to provoke. Not him. But someone else? She turned toward the woods without thinking. In the forest, the shadows were cooler. Older. Kael sat beside a fire pit gone cold. Allen, the elder, moved slowly, drawing symbols in the gray ash. Each stroke precise, each curve a sentence from a language only remembered through motion. Kael said nothing for a while. Then, finally, "Error." Allen's finger paused mid-circle. "Whose?" Kael didn't answer. Because he already knew the answer. He had seen it with his own eyes. One of the young hunters, impatient, eager to impress, had crept through the trees the night before. Kael had glimpsed the glint of something heavy wrapped in cloth as the boy returned. He hadn't spoken. Hadn't asked? But now, the weight of silence pressed on him like snow before an avalanche. "Do you believe she knew?" Allen asked without turning. Kael shook his head. "No. She knew nothing." The forest was quiet. Not peaceful, listening. And in that stillness, Kael made his choice. That evening, the camp's noise had died down, but the air had not settled. Something brittle hummed just beneath the surface. Men sharpened blades too often. Voices dropped when they passed the tree line. Freydis stood near the shore, alone. She watched the sun bleed low behind the masts of the ships, casting long shadows across the sand. Then, a sound. Not footsteps. A rhythm. She turned. Kael stepped from the forest. In his arms, wrapped in dark woven cloth, was something long and heavy. He walked with no rush. No fear. When he reached her, he stopped just short of where the sand turned to campground. He knelt, unwrapped the bundle, and revealed the axe. It caught the last of the sunlight like it knew what it had done. Kael placed it on the earth between them. He said nothing. Freydis approached. Her hands were still. She looked at the axe. Then at him. There were no guards with her. No soldiers behind him. Only the hush of water. The slow rhythm of trust being tested. She knelt beside him. And bowed her head. Then, and only then, a smile ghosted across her lips. A small one. Not wide. Not loud. But real. Kael didn't return it. But something softened around his eyes. Like ice just beginning to melt in spring. He stood. Gave a slight nod. And left the axe behind. That night, Skardi found his weapon laid neatly at the camp's edge. Clean. Honored. Returned without claim. He picked it up in silence. And later, as the fires burned lower, he passed by Freydis. Paused. Then said, "You see what others miss. You speak without speaking. That's a gift. Use it well. But far from camp, in the trees, a sound rang out. The crack of splintered bark. The sacred tree, marked with red dye, never to be touched, had fallen. Felled by hands that didn't know. A Viking crew, gathering wood, had chosen it without meaning offense. But intent did not erase weight. Kael reached the clearing too late. Allen stood beside the stump, his face unreadable. This, he said, his voice slow as moss growing over bone, will be fire. Or light. You will decide which. Kael looked at the axe mark in the bark. And knew. Peace had not broken. But it was bending. Some fires burned for warmth. Others for warning. The sky dimmed not because of the clouds, but because of what had been done. From the edge of the forest, where earth met ash, Kael watched smoke rise in two directions, one spiral soft and blue from the village fire, the other darker, heavier, curling over the Viking camp where their flames licked fresh logs. Logs from the tree. The tree. Not just wood. Not just roots. The wind tree, as the elders called it. A marker between this world and the next. A place where souls lingered before they crossed the silence. It had stood alone for generations, respected, untouched. Until now. Kael moved through the village like someone walking through water. Allen was already waiting by the fire. The flames tonight were tall, too tall. They cracked not with heat, but with voices buried in them. The kind of fire that pulled others in and pulled truth out. He stood beside Kael without greeting. No need. They took more than bark and bone, Allen said. Kael nodded. They didn't know. They didn't ask, the old man answered. And the heart does not forgive what the mouth cannot name. Behind them, the young ones murmured. Their hands were not yet calloused by war, but they moved like they wanted them to be. They've shown what they are. They swing first, then speak. We should light their camp the way they lit our tree. Kael clenched his jaw. He could say it was a mistake. He could try. But that didn't feel like enough anymore. Mistake or not, something had been broken. Not loud, but deep. Across the forest, the Vikings had made no ceremony of it. The tree had fallen with a single clean strike, then a second. They had dragged the logs back for cooking, for carving, for shelter. Just another resource. But Freydis knew something had gone wrong the moment she saw Kael's eyes in her memory. That steady gaze that had never flinched, even when everything else felt like it might. She approached the fire, stood across from Skardi and the others. They say it was sacred, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. Skardi scoffed. Every tree's sacred to someone. But her father, who had worked with wood longer than Skardi had held a sword, said nothing. His brow furrowed, his hands paused over his carving knife. Later that night, Freydis found him again. And explained. Kael waited in the dark. Not quite at the edge of their village. Not quite in the space between. Just somewhere near where the silence felt full. He held in his hands a broken branch, one he'd taken from the roots of the fallen wind tree. He didn't plan to speak. But he hoped to be seen. Freydis came without sound. Her shadow arrived before her body. They didn't greet each other. He opened his palm. Showed the piece of bark. Freydis didn't flinch. She only knelt, and in the soft earth between them, she drew. A tree. A break. A flame. And then, a hand between them. She added another mark, not a rune, not a word, just a loop. A sign of return. Kael placed the branch gently on the drawing. The wind stirred. It did not scatter. Back at her camp, Freydis stood before her father. She told him about the tree. Not just what it was, but what it meant. It wasn't just wood. It was a breath. A way through. Her father listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, Then we repay. Not with what we say, but with what we leave. So they began to carve. Not all of them. Just a few. The strongest log was chosen, not for burning, but for shaping. A post. Tall and unadorned. At the top, Freydis carved an old rune, HLJ, silence. Below it, her father etched wind. At the very base, Kael's ribbon, woven in through the wood itself. Silent. But present. But Kael knew wood was not enough. So that same night, while the fire in his village still burned, he stepped into its circle. No one noticed him at first. He knelt, and laid a carved token at the edge, a sliver of the wind tree. He had carved no symbols on it, only left it there, and turned to walk away. Allen, from the shadows, saw, and said only, "Not all fire consumes." At dawn, the Viking camp was empty. No sails. No shouts. Only the sound of gulls overhead. In the center of the clearing stood a single post. Smooth. Tall. Quiet. On it, a rune. A curve of wind. A ribbon, faded red. Kael arrived as light began to rise. He stepped up to it, placed his hand on the grain, and whispered. Beside him, Allen nodded. And the forest, for once, did not answer. It only breathed. Where roots speak in silence, and leaves whisper truths we're afraid to know. It was not a place marked on any map. Not a grove you could stumble upon. The elders called it the Dream Tree, though it was not tall, nor wide, nor ancient by the counting of rings. But it was known, in silence, by those who listened more than they spoke. Kael followed Allen through a narrow trail, where the trees grew close and the air smelled like cold stone and moss. They said that even the birds did not sing here. The tree stood alone in a clearing that felt untouched by time. Its bark curled inward like dry pages. Its roots twisted above the soil as though they were not reaching down, but remembering something deep beneath. It was not a grand tree. It was simply present. Allen stopped a few steps away. Without a word, he placed his staff gently on the earth and opened a small pouch. Inside, herbs dried to silver, pieces of bark from the peace post, and one smooth stone that seemed to hum when touched. Kael knelt by the roots. He unwrapped two things from the cloth in his hand. A shard of the wood from the peace post, and the red ribbon Freydis had once given him. The wind did not blow, but the leaves above shivered. Allen knelt beside him, placed the herbs into a carved bowl, and lit them with a coal no larger than a fingernail. There was no flame. Only smoke, low, curling, and blue. Allen laid a hand on the earth beside the tree. Ask no question with your tongue, he said. The roots do not speak that way. Kael closed his eyes, and the smoke entered his breath. First, there was stillness. Not darkness. Just the absence of edges. Then bark. Close and endless, like he had become the inside of the tree. He was not looking at it. He was it. And the bark began to crack. From its heart, water spilled, not crashing, but flowing slowly, almost carefully. Within the water, faces. Dozens. Hundreds. Some he knew, Freydis, Allen, his father, warriors from both sides. Others unfamiliar, but somehow already remembered. They did not speak. They only watched. And then the water began to rise, up the trunk, into the branches, until the entire tree glowed from within. At its center, a seed. Small. Pulsing. Alive. A voice came, not from above, nor below. Not old, not young. Not man or woman. Just a voice of breath. Not those who shout lead the way, but those who hold the space. Kael felt something shift inside his chest. Not fear. Like soil, finally loosened after long frost. When he opened his eyes, the smoke had faded. The bowl was cold. Allen had not moved. Kael looked at the shard of wood and the ribbon, and slowly, without speaking, tied the ribbon around the shard. Not tight, but certain. Then he stood, walked to the tree, and placed the bundle among its roots. Not to bury. Just to leave. Far away, Freydis sat alone in her camp, her charcoal stick pressed to the ground. She had not slept. She had felt something shift, like a tide within her breath. So she drew. A tree. A wave. Two hands not clasped, but cupping the same small object. A seed. She paused, not because the drawing was done, but because her chest felt suddenly full. Not heavy, but full. When she rose at dawn, she left the camp quietly. By the edge of the woods, where moss grows softer than cloth, she found it. A small piece of carved wood, wrapped in the red ribbon. She pressed it to her chest, then whispered into the quiet. We are not of the same land, but we are joined by what grows. Later that morning, Olin sat with Kael beside a shallow clay bowl. In its center, a sprout. New. Green. Alive. Kael stared. That seed, Olin said quietly, was dry for 100 seasons. Kael looked up, eyes wide. Olin smiled slightly. It needed no water. It needed only silence that listens. But just as roots wake, so do the winds. On his way back to the village, Kael climbed a higher path, one he hadn't taken in moons. From there, the western ridge opened before him like a mouth. And beyond it, smoke. Not thin, curling hearth smoke, but black columns. Heavy. Below them, figures. Moving slow and direct. Not his people. Not Freydis's. Others. Not with questions. Not with peace. Kael's breath caught in his throat. The dream had ended. Now began the part where one must decide whether to wake or stand. Some places do not belong to any tribe. They belong to the moment. Before war, before peace, there are places made only of silence. Not because they lack words, but because they've already heard them all. They are not owned. They are not marked. They simply are. In the depths of the forest, on a soft bed of moss and fallen pine needles, such a place waited, a stone, broad and flat, worn smooth by rain and time. Neither tribe claimed it. Neither dared build near it. But all knew its name. The Stone of Balance. Where weapons are not drawn. Where gestures speak louder than any tongue. That morning, Kael saw smoke again on the northern cliffs. Different sails. Heavy steps. Men who did not ask. He returned to the village and spoke with Olin, but the old man only said, There are voices louder than ours. If we shout with them, we become them. So Kael took the red ribbon Freydis once gave him, the sleepwood shard from the dream tree, and the charcoal he kept since the fire. Then, alone, he walked. It took him half a day to reach the clearing. The forest thickened before parting, not like a curtain drawn open, but like a held breath finally exhaled. The stone sat still in the center. No moss on top, as if it rejected even nature's claiming. Kael knelt beside it. He laid the shard down. Then, quietly, lit a tiny ember of dry grass beside it. No fire. Just warmth. Not long after, Freydis arrived. She stepped into the clearing soundlessly, her braid wrapped in cloth, her boots stained from river mud. She'd come from the other side of the forest, her thoughts full of names she didn't yet speak. When she saw Kael, she didn't hesitate. She only nodded. He nodded back. Then she sat opposite him. Between them, the stone. On it, the shard of wood, now warm to the touch. Kael pulled out a piece of charcoal and drew slowly. A circle. A dot at its center. A single wave passing through. Freydis leaned in, studying it. She understood without needing words. World. Self. Change. Then, without looking away, she drew her knife. Kael tensed, only slightly. But she held it differently. With care, she laid it between them, flat, silent, like a question answered before it was asked. A blade not as threat, but as choice. Then she looked up and said her first words that day. I carry it so I don't have to use it. Kael reached forward. Not to take it. To move it, gently, beside the sleepwood shard. Now both objects rested side by side. Weapon. Memory. From her pocket, Freydis removed a new ribbon. Crimson. Clean. Unworn. She unwound it, holding one end. Kael held the other. For a moment neither moved. Then they gently pulled, just enough to make it taut. Their hands didn't touch, but their gesture did. One ribbon. Two hands. Not given. Not taken. Just held. As if saying, "This time, we do not offer. We share." Wind stirred the pine trees. The leaves rustled softly, not like warning, more like breath. Then, slowly, they released the ribbon. Freydis folded it. Not into a knot. Into a spiral, like a seed. Kael traced the charcoal mark once more, then blew softly on it, letting the dust of the drawing rise into air. The moment was not over. But it had been made. They rose together. And parted ways, not with backs turned, but with glances over the shoulder. Not a farewell. A return. In the shadows of the trees, a man watched. Old, wrapped in a wolfskin cloak, eyes dark and steady, a silent hunter from Kael's village, once a warrior, now simply aware. He waited until the two figures were gone, then approached the stone. He looked at the ribbon spiral, the blade mark, the faint warmth in the stone's center, and smiled. "It breathes," he whispered. "It's not stone anymore. It's soil." He took nothing, left only his breath, and returned home with a story that needed no embellishment. But stories don't stop. That night, new sails scraped the shoreline. Not with welcome. With weight. Iron-shod boots struck sand. Symbols painted over older ones. No greetings. No questions. Only presence. Far inland, the watch fires, long since cold, flickered back to life. 1, then 3, then 12. Some fires warm. Others worn. But these call. Some fires burn everything but meaning. The smoke came at dawn. Thin, low, crawling like memory. Not from the hearths of Kael's people, nor the cooking fires of Freydis' kin. This smoke came from the north, carried by a wind that whispered through pines and stirred the hair on the back of Kael's neck. He had dreamt of it 2 nights before. A tree burning without sound. A wave of black that rose and fell, not to warm, not to cook, but to claim. Now the dream stepped into daylight. Kael moved fast, barefoot across moss. He reached the ridge above the lower glade and saw it. Fire not far, though it was not large. But it had teeth. It had been lit not out of need, but out of want. To clear space. To announce presence. He crouched and touched the ground. Still warm. Still fresh. He found footprints, large, deep. Boots. Not from Freydis' people. Not his. Strangers. At the edge of the fire-scarred woods, the people of his village gathered. Voices low, brows set. "This is an offense. They bring fire to our roots. We must strike before they strike us." Kael said nothing, but his thoughts burned faster than flame. "Another fire will not put this one out," he whispered to Olin. The old man only looked toward the trees. Far across the forest, in the encampment of the seafarers, Freydis also heard. Skardi stood before the gathering men. His jaw was tight. "They came with axes," he said. "Not with hands open. They take the trees, they light them. They don't ask. They don't wait." Freydis watched the men prepare, oils, blades, armor. She turned away. Went to her tent. Opened her notebook. On a page she had marked long ago, she drew a circle. Then broke it into 3 parts. Then beneath it, slowly, deliberately, she added a flame. That night, when the sky held no stars, Kael waited by the old stone. He didn't need to send a message. Freydis would come. And she did. No weapons. No ribbon this time. Only ash on her sleeves, and charcoal in her fingers. They sat on opposite sides of the stone. Their breath visible in the coolness. The forest held still. Kael reached down and drew. Fire. Leaf. Water. 3 simple marks. Freydis understood. She added a 4th. A spiral. Balance. Their shared symbol. "It's not for them," she said. "No," Kael agreed. It's for us. So we don't forget. At dawn, the strangers came further into the forest. Their feet snapped twigs. Their knives cut roots. But when they reached a certain glade, they paused. There, on a flat stone, scrawled in soot and ash. Here, it is not trees that burn. It is the path. They didn't understand the language. But something in the silence of the woods made them hesitate. The birds had gone quiet. The air was still. And the fire they had lit the night before had not spread. It had died. Without a sound. They turned back. Not out of fear. But because something had been seen. And they knew they hadn't seen it all. Later that day, Freydis found something on the blanket inside her tent. A smooth stone. Palm-sized. Pressed into it, a soot-darkened handprint. Familiar. Kael. She didn't smile. She only placed it inside her notebook. Between the pages. Like a seed. He was here, she whispered. And he still is. That night, in the clearing beyond the river, something unthinkable happened. The two camps met. Not all. Just a few. No fire between them. Only air. And space. And the scent of ash fading. Kael stood beneath the hanging pine boughs, still and waiting. From the other side came Skardi. The warrior who once did not trust. Who had sharpened his blade as soon as he saw strangers. Now, he approached Kael with nothing drawn. When he stopped, he said nothing. He reached to his belt. Drew his blade. Held it by the metal, not the hilt. And extended the handle to Kael. Not for surrender. Not for show. For acknowledgement. Kael took it. Not to keep. To understand. Then handed it back, hilt first. Two men. Two hands. No words. Just steel. And stillness. The fires had come. But not all fires destroy. Some burned just enough to reveal. And the ashes. The ashes had something to say. Some winds carry seeds. Others carry warnings. The river bent like a silver thread between earth and forest, never choosing sides, never taking names. For generations the bend had served as a quiet meeting point. Hunters had filled water skins there, and even warriors had once paused before crossing. Now, beneath the moon half shy behind clouds, the air thickened again. And this time, it was not with peace. Kael was the first to smell the smoke. Not the gentle kind of a cooking fire or ceremony. This was bitter. Sharp. New. He moved along the ridge quickly, his breath steady, his feet finding moss-soft ground as if drawn. Down in the valley, near the old crossing, he saw flames licking low brush. Shadows moved between the light, not from his village and not the Norse. They carried torches, their words loud and clumsy, in no tongue Kael knew. Not ours, he whispered, and not theirs. Freydis had seen the same red glow from her side of the river. From the high cliff path, she watched the strangers move like fireflies, aimless and armed. She found Kael near the trees. They don't belong to either world, she said, her voice low. They bring heat. But not light. Kael nodded. He knelt, pulled an arrow from his quiver, tied a strip of cloth to it, soaked in oil, and lit it. The fire rose slowly, a tongue of gold above the trees. A signal. Not to attack, but to gather. From the east came the warriors of the forest, spears silent but ready. From the west came the Norse, axes gleaming but held low. Two lines of strength, once wary of each other, now stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the same enemy. Skardi moved to Kael's side. He said nothing for a while. Then, I didn't think I'd ever stand next to you, let alone with you. And yet, Kael said quietly, here we are. Skardi gave a dry grunt, not quite a laugh. They didn't march forward. They waited. Because some battles are not won by stepping, but by staying still. High in the hills, elders of the forest moved like shadows. Hands older than war reached into ancient stonework, pulling at levers long forgotten by most. And the locks gave way. The river, patient until now, rose. At first, it was a ripple. Then a swell. Then a force. The intruders felt it in their knees, a tug at their boots, a hiss against the banks. Their torches flickered. One went out. Then another. And the sound of the water became louder than footsteps. They didn't run. They didn't need to. The river simply pushed them back. Not as an army would, but like truth, slow and unstoppable. When it was done, and the waters calmed again, the strangers were gone. No one had drawn a blade. But the earth had spoken. They gathered on the wet bank. Kael stood beside Freydis, whose braid was undone by the wind. Skardi's shoulders were damp from the mist. Everyone was quiet, not out of fear but all. We didn't fight, Skardi said finally. But we won. Kael didn't smile. But he looked up. And nodded. Freydis stepped forward. In her hand, a red ribbon, the same one she'd carried since that first meeting. She took 2 spears, one from her people, one from Kael's, and drove them side by side into the wet earth. Then tied the ribbon between them. This, she said softly, is no longer for trees. Or for trails. This is for us. And what we hold between us. As the crowd dispersed, Kael lingered by the water. A piece of driftwood brushed against his boot. It carried something smooth, a stone, pale, ridged. He picked it up. And on its face, a carving. 3 arrows. All pointing toward a single center. He brought it to Olin that night. The elder took it in both hands, eyes wide, breath shallow. It comes, Olin whispered. The sign from dream. It has always waited in water. Later, under the starlit hush of the deep night, Kael and Freydis sat by the river again. The ribbon between the spears fluttered behind them. The fire was out. There was no need for words. But after a long time, Freydis turned to him. Everything we didn't say, she said. I remember anyway. Kael looked up at the stars. And for the first time in many nights, he smiled. Peace does not arrive like thunder. It steps in quietly, barefoot. The clearing between the river and the forest had always felt older than everything around it. Worn smooth by the passage of bare feet and soft ceremonies, it held no walls, no names, no carvings. Only earth and sky, and the silence of those who once listened here more than they spoke. It had always belonged to the people of the trees. Until now. Olin arrived just before dusk. His feet moved as if remembering, not walking, as if the soil still held the shape of ancestors long gone. Kael stood nearby, watching the way the old man bowed slightly, not to him, but to the ground. Enough of words, Olin said. Enough of fire. Place your feet upon the earth, and it will answer for us. Across the forest, in the Viking camp, Freydis was making a different kind of offering. She had taken a piece of the broken runestone that once stood at the edge of their camp, shattered during the storm, its ruin now incomplete. She held it tightly, feeling the jagged edge press into her palm like a question. She approached Skardi, who sat sharpening a blade that might never see war again. I want to try something, she said quietly. No steel. No oaths. Just feet. In a circle. Together. Barefoot? Skardi raised an eyebrow. Yes. Strange way to start peace, he grumbled. But we've tried stranger. When the light began to fade and the crickets sang low, they came. From both sides. Slowly. Quietly. No banners, no trumpets. No drums to set them apart. Only breath. And bare steps on soft earth. They left their weapons at the forest's edge, wrapped in linen, under pine. Not hidden, just set aside. Visible. Untouched. Each carried something. Not for barter, not for defense, but for meaning. Kael brought a single leaf from the dream tree, still green but drying at the edges. Freydis, her fragment of runestone, the rune now more of a question than a word. Skardi carried a broken arrowhead, dulled by ash. A young shaman brought a braid of rivergrass, knotted with smoke. A sailor from the far boat came holding a loop of ship's rope, old, frayed, but uncut. Together they stepped into the clearing, barefoot. At the center stood a flat stone, sacred in its simplicity. No one ever stood upon it. Not even now. They formed a circle around it, not touching, not pressing, just there. Present. Some closed their eyes. Some whispered things only the wind might keep. Some said nothing at all. Kael stood still, his breath slow. He could feel the earth below, cool, grounded, deeper than any fire. The circle held. Not like walls. Like roots. And then, Allen spoke. "There is no yours or mine here. Only what stands. Only what grows." No one clapped. No one cheered. But something softened. One of the younger Norsemen, one who had once thrown stones across a border he didn't understand, sank to his knees. He placed his hands on the soil. "I didn't know this land was mine too," he whispered. That was all. And one by one they stepped forward to the stone. Each placed their offering, not for display, not for glory, but to let it rest there, with the earth. The leaf. The stone. The arrowhead. The braid. The rope. None were taken back. None needed to be. They left them as roots leave seeds, not knowing what might grow, but trusting the soil. No one spoke again. But as they walked away from the circle, still barefoot, the wind moved differently. Not louder. Just closer. Later that night, Freydis returned alone. She stood at the edge of the clearing, unsure why. The moon was thin, the air still. She walked to the place where her feet had stood during the ritual. And there, in the damp earth, something small had broken through. A sprout. A single green stem, pushing up from the soil. She hadn't planted it. But it had grown. She knelt, pressing her fingers gently into the earth beside it. And she smiled. "You remember too," she whispered. To be continued. By morning the Norsemen were preparing their ships again. Not out of defeat, but because their reason for staying had finished growing roots. Freydis stood on the shore, watching the sails be folded. She did not know if she would board. Kael stood beside her, watching the tree lean instead. "Sometimes the path home isn't a ship," he said softly. "It's roots." And for the first time, she didn't look back toward the boat. She looked down. And breathed. Leaving is not always going away. Sometimes it's becoming. The sun was sinking low behind the trees when the longship began to creak against its mooring ropes. The wind had stilled, and the water in the bay lay smooth as polished glass, reflecting the last copper strokes of light in trembling ripples. The air smelled of pine smoke, salt, and something quieter, like the hush that follows a final word spoken from the heart. It was time. Leif Erikson had made his decision that morning. No arguments were raised, for none were needed. "We came to listen," he said. "And now the land has spoken. It does not belong to us." The elders packed methodically, their movements slower than before, as if each gesture was not just preparation, but a kind of farewell. Rope was coiled. Tools wiped clean. Bows wrapped in leather and laid to rest. Skardi, once quick to bark and curse, now moved as if every object he touched had weight beyond its form. His eyes lingered longer on the forest. Once he might have called it wild. Now, he simply called it living. Freydis stood apart. She carried no satchel, no bundle of personal belongings. Only her leather-bound notebook, frayed at the corners, and a red ribbon wound carefully around her wrist. There were no words in her throat, only an ache she could not name. From the woods came Kael, quiet as always, but this time his approach was slower, deliberate. He carried something in his hand, a dried leaf from the dream tree, the edges curled like a sleeping breath, tied gently with her red ribbon. It was not a gift, not a token. It was a truth. Without speaking, he placed it into her palm. His eyes did not meet hers, but they didn't need to. She closed her hand around the offering, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from something deeper. Something being known. She reached into her tunic and pulled free a small cloth pouch, worn and tied with sinew. She placed it in his hand. So you'll remember what it felt like to stand between two waters, she said. Inside was a handful of soil taken from the shoreline where ship met land. Not the forest. Not the sea. The place between. Where they had met. They sat on the sand in silence, side by side, their shadows leaning eastward. No promises were made. They both knew better. But presence, that, at least, was real. Do you think we'll see each other again? Freydis asked quietly. Kael's eyes remained on the horizon. The sea was glowing now, gold draining into indigo. We already have, he said. And that's more than most ever get. When the ship finally pushed off, it did so without ceremony. The sails filled with the faintest breeze. Oars dipped in near silence. No one waved. Freydis stood on the deck, fingers curled tight around the soil pouch in her hand. She looked back only once, not to mourn, but to remember. The forest line receded. The mountains softened into shadow. The land didn't hold her back. But it didn't let go either. On the beach, Kael watched until the ship was a dark shape against silver. He turned, walked to the clearing where once a peace post had stood, cut from wood now ash, lost in fire. But in its place, a sapling had sprouted. Thin, green, almost unnoticeable. He knelt, touched the earth. You don't need to know words, he whispered. Just grow. The dust deepened. No one came to break the silence. And then, a rustle. From the edge of the trees stepped a young boy from Kael's village. Barefoot, wide-eyed, with something wrapped in cloth. He opened it, a charred shard of stone, etched faintly with runes, remnant of the post lost in the first fires. Kael took it gently. His fingers brushed the soot. Even what burns, he murmured, can be part of a beginning. The land had long gone quiet. Seasons passed over the bones of what once had been, footprints softened by moss, voices carried away by wind. Where the twin camps of forest and fjord had once pulsed with mistrust, there now stood only silence and the slow rhythm of time. The fire pits were covered in grass. The woven shelters had collapsed into the roots. But one thing remained. The tree. It was no longer a sapling. Its trunk split early at the base, growing in two directions, one side smooth and gray, the other dark and coarse. They called it the tree of two roots. Not because it was rare, but because it remembered. Beneath its crown, there lay a flat stone, weathered and round. If you looked closely, you could still see a smudge of old charcoal, as if someone had tried to draw something once, and then changed their mind. People came there sometimes. They didn't say much. A girl would leave a feather. A sailor might place a knot of rope. Others, a leaf, or a carved bead. They stayed only moments. Then left, walking barefoot back into the world. Kael sat beneath the tree. His hair was silver now, pulled back behind his ears. His legs didn't move as quickly as they once had, but his eyes hadn't dimmed. Beside him sat a child, cross-legged, listening. There was a time, Kael said softly, when we spoke no words in common. But we stood on the same earth. And the earth spoke to both. The child tilted his head. Who was she? The one with the red ribbon? Kael smiled, not wide, but deep, the kind that comes from roots. She was the first to smile instead of fear. Far across the sea, in a place where the sand was redder and the gulls cried in a different pitch, Freydis sat at her table, a leather-bound book open before her. Her hair, still long, was tied back with a faded ribbon. Near the door, a child played in the dust, tracing shapes with a stick. On a shelf above her bed sat a small cloth pouch. Inside it, earth from the far shore. Back beneath the tree, a breeze stirred the leaves. One golden one, the size of a hand, drifted down and landed near Kael's shoulder. He didn't brush it away. Instead, he placed his hand beside it. The flat stone now bore 3 etched symbols, worn shallow by years of wind and rain, flame, leaf, and wave. And just below it, peeking through the soil, a new sprout had begun to rise. Kael leaned back against the bark. The seed grows, he whispered, not because it is watered, but because it was waited for. As night settled, the sky deepened into velvet. Somewhere in the branches, a red ribbon fluttered gently, still tied to a limb no one remembered tying it to. And in the hush before sleep, a voice seemed to speak, not from above, not from below, but from within. Sometimes home is not a place. It's the imprint you leave in someone else's heart.